Hello everybody, good morning or good evening depending on where you are in the world. My name is Luke Holder and I'd like to teach you a little bit about layer styles, and I believe I've titled the name of this screencast Jailbreak Your Layer Styles. So let's open up Photoshop and get into it. I've got two main objects here on my canvas, and they're just two plain white squares, square shapes. And as many of you know, layer styles are a great way to add design and features to objects within a layer. And the great thing about layer styles is that they are non-destructive to the layer, so you can add and remove layer styles anytime you want without breaking the shape or worrying about losing something if you change your mind. And the great thing about layer styles is that you can move them and reuse them, and they're a great way of adding very common kinds of features to an object. So the way I usually just open up the layer styles palette is by double clicking on the layer itself, to the left or to the right. And well-known box, we've got all of the different layer styles down the left hand side, and very easily you can just go along and start clicking away at the styles that you want. And obviously all of the defaults are pretty ugly. So there you go, I've added bezel and outer glow and drop shadow and stroke and a color overlay, which doesn't look like it's applying it to the background and not to the image I have over the top. But I'm going to turn all these ones off for a second, and I'm going to talk about just a couple of them. So drop shadow is a very common, well-known layer style, and what I'm going to do is, to this white piece of card here, I'm going to turn off the global light, change the angle to 90 degrees, and bring the opacity all the way down. Now I'm going to make the distance a little bit further than I normally would, and make the size of the drop shadow a little bit larger. Okay, so hopefully you can all see now that this shape has a kind of a grey light drop shadow. And if I click OK, you can see the difference between this one and this one. Very common layer style, a drop shadow. Some would say overly used sometimes, but I think when it's very subtle it works well. Now, the tip I wanted to show you today is how to break your layer styles out. So as you can see down here on the right, the effect of the drop shadow and the layer styles have been applied to this layer. And the great thing about that is, like I said, you can resize this layer shape and the effect will go with it non-destructively. But sometimes you want to have more, you want to have direct manipulation over that layer style, and there's a way to do that. So if we select the layer and we come up to layer, and then we go to layer style, and we're going to select an option here called create layer. Now what that does is that will create, as it says, a layer from the current layer styles. Now that may mean it may create 4 or 5 layers, depending on how many layer styles you've actually added to the element. So if I go ahead and click that, it's going to give me a warning that some aspects of layer styles can't be reproduced as layers. I haven't found many that don't do that, but it's a nice warning as well, though, to remember that once you separate the layer style from the layer, it's no longer attached to the layer. So if you change the shape or the size, then you're going to lose that layer style. But I'll come back to that. So I clicked OK, and you can see now that this layer, the white square, no longer has the drop shadow style applied to it, but below here there's a new layer, and if I hide the white square and I hide that one, you can see there's my drop shadow, and it's on its own layer. It's nicely sized to the same size as my square. And the great thing about this is that I can do a transform on that. Let's make sure I've got the correct channel selected. If I do Command T, I can do a transform, so I can resize that layer. And I can also do a bunch of other effects that transform gives me, like warp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn back on my white square, go to Command T, and again select warp. So now I can do something that is a very common effect, and that is manipulating the drop shadow. So I can bring up these center pieces here, bring down the right side and the left side, or the left side and the right side. Select OK, and I'll turn back on the image. So there you go. I have now directly manipulated or warped the layer style on its own layer as it sits beneath the original layer. And this wouldn't be possible with just a layer style. If I go back to the layer style itself, you can see that the drop shadow has been removed because I've separated it to its own layer. And if I come to the drop shadow options, you can see warp or modify to that degree isn't possible with a standard drop shadow. So you're getting the benefit of the creation of the drop shadow with the benefit of it being its own layer and you being able to do whatever you want to it. Now the great thing about that is we can literally duplicate that. We know we have the same size. We're going to drag that over there underneath that one. And now we've got both our shapes. What we can also do though is if we go back to the original layer, we can come and add another drop shadow. So we are stacking layers on top of each other. So I'm going to create that 2 and 2 and select OK. So now I've got a nice uniform sized drop shadow around the actual shape, plus my additional separated layer style that has been warped to make this item look a little bit more like paper. Now that's the tip I wanted to share, and I'll just go over that again. When you've got your layer selected that has a layer style, you come up to layer, go to layer style and create a layer, and that separates the layer styles out to their own layers and allows you to manipulate them. And so that concludes what I wanted to share. Welcome to get in contact with me with any questions at Luke Holder on Twitter. Also available website is logicandpixels.com.au, and look forward to hearing from you. Otherwise, have a great day.